Thank you for taking the time to attend our presentation, How to Prepare Your Organization for an OCR HIPAA Audit. Our speaker today is Mac McMillan. Mac is CEO and co-founder of Cynergistek Incorporated, a firm specialized in information security and regulatory compliance in healthcare. He is chair of the HIMSS Privacy and Security Policy Task Force and brings nearly 40 years of experience from government and private sector positions. He has worked in the healthcare industry since his retirement from the government and contributes regularly to thought leadership around compliance, security, and privacy in healthcare. He currently sits on several industry advisory boards, including CHIME, AHIS, and Healthcare Most Wired, as well as on the healthinfosecurity.com editorial advisory board. And now I'll turn it over to Mac to get us started.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and welcome everybody to our seminar today. For me, this is the second time this week to actually present this information. I just returned today from the HIMAA annual conference down in New Orleans and gave this presentation, or one like it, on Monday to an audience down there made up primarily of folks in the HIM space. So obviously it's a hot topic for everybody. Everybody wants to know what's going on with respect to the audits, and I was actually very fortunate on Monday, during Monday's presentation, to have Zenithia Clemens from OCR, from headquarters, who actually manages the contracts around the audit program, and she and I had an opportunity to speak before my presentation as well as afterwards. And so what I'll be presenting today, at least as of yesterday, was the most current information that we've got directly from the folks there at OCR with respect to what's going on and what to expect from the permanent audit program. So we're going to go over the audit program. We're going to talk a little bit about the pilot audits first, just to explain how those feed into the permanent audit program and what's important to understand about the relationship between the two. And then we're going to talk about the permanent audit program itself and what to expect. And then I'm going to go into the actual audit process for both the desk audits as well as the comprehensive audits, and then finish up by talking about how to use the OCR audit toolkit, or how to create an OCR audit toolkit utilizing the OCR audit protocol. And I'm going to try to answer all the questions that I think are out there, but certainly if I miss something or if I don't explain something well enough, or if you have additional questions, please feel free to ask those, and so we can get those answered for you. So with that, let's get started. So let's talk about the program itself. So obviously everybody knows that this requirement came down in 2009 as a result of some of the performance metrics that were being collected at the time by the government. Congress decided that one of the things that OCR needed to do was institute an audit program to measure against the compliance as it related to both the HIPAA security and privacy rules. The requirement was for them to conduct audits then of covered entities, now as a result of the omnibus rule, both covered entities and business associates, but for them to conduct these random audits for the purpose of, one, examining how well compliance was working, identifying best practices, not just what organizations were doing, but things that they could identify in the industry that they could then share with other parts of the industry to help improve program or progress or compliance overall. Obviously, to discover risks and vulnerabilities that were out there that needed to be dealt with, that had been identified through the complaint process or investigations, and we'll talk about how that ties into the permanent audit program as well as we go forward. And of course, to bring attention to the need for compliance and the need for meeting our privacy and security responsibilities. So that's what the program was designed to do. It was not designed as an enforcement tool. It was designed as a measurement tool to understand how well we were doing as an industry, where we needed to work, where we needed to focus, and how, and to be able to identify lessons learned and be able to share those with other parts of the industry going forward. How did they select organizations for the audits back then, and how are they doing it today? They're actually going to use the same method. They have various databases that they pull from to identify who the covered entities are. They are going to select organizations again based on size and complexity of the organization. They're going to select them based on geographic location. They're going to select them based on type of entity, and then last but not least, affiliation with other covered entities. So one of the things that they're going to do, just like we saw in the pilot program, is they're going to try to create a very balanced group of organizations that they audit, so that when they look at the results afterwards, they get more of a sense of how the industry as a whole is doing, as opposed to, say, one segment of the industry. So what we can expect is some distribution of covered entities, just like we saw before, between dental practices, long-term care, hospitals, large and small, laboratories, pharmacies, etc. We'll see clearinghouses, we'll see payers, insurance, both independent and large payers involved, both large and small. And then this time around, we're going to actually see business associates added into the mix as well. But regardless of and we're going to see folks, a distribution of folks across the country. So there won't be an disproportionate number of facilities selected, say, in a densely populated area as opposed to a less densely populated area. The distribution will hopefully be pretty well dispersed across the country with respect to where our hospitals and health systems and covered entities and business associates are located. And again, the reason they want to do that is because when they go afterwards and go in and begin to analyze the results, and they say that X% of the industry is doing this well or that well, they want it to actually represent what the industry as a whole looks like, and not just some portion of the industry. If you look at the pilot program, they were originally scheduled to do 150 audits. They ended up doing 115. 61 of those were providers, 47 health plans, and 7 of them clearinghouses. There were no business associates in the pilot program, as everybody recalls. If you look at all of the organizations that were audited during that time, there were only 11% of those organizations who didn't have any findings or so that got through the audit with a clean bill of health, if you will. We pretty much had organizations across the spectrum that had findings. There were a considerable number of findings across the remaining 104 organizations, 979 to be exact, and you can see how they're broken down here. You notice that there were more findings in security than there are privacy, and one of the things that was suggested was that was because there were fewer privacy requirements than there were security. As it turns out, that's not actually accurate. There were actually more requirements in the privacy side of the protocol than there were security. There were just more findings on the security side, and we think part of that was due to the fact that privacy was more of a straightforward proposition in terms of more of a black and white procedural type thing, whereas security was very different depending on the type of organization and the facet of security you were dealing with, and it had addressable standards as well that factored in there that added greater difficulty or complexity to the equation, and we think that led to a lot more of the findings that we saw on the security side. And then of course there were findings on the breach side as well. The other thing that we saw in the pilot program, which was no surprise to anybody, was that smaller entities seemed to do a lot worse than larger organizations. And in particular, other organizations that went through or periodically went through other types of audits for other programs more frequently tended to do better than folks who did not go through many audits, if you will, in terms of from a regulatory perspective. So the findings were not necessarily surprising overall, but what was interesting about the findings from the pilot year that are going to feed into the permanent program were the areas that were identified as being of highest risk. So on the privacy side, there were essentially 5 areas that were identified: notice of privacy practices, restrictions for requests or alternate communications, individual rights of access, administrative standards, and uses and disclosures of protected health information. And one of the things that you'll see when we look at the scope and the focus of the permanent audit program, at least for this first phase, you're going to notice that this is kind of driving what they're going to be looking at. A lot of the things that they're going to look at in the permanent audit program starting out are the areas that we didn't do well in during the pilot program. On the security side, there were a few more areas that were identified. Risk analysis was one of the big areas, access management, security incident procedures, contingency planning, audit controls, and monitoring movement and destruction of data. Again, these are areas that you'll see when we look at the scope for the permanent audit program are driving what they're going to be initially looking at. And so they're areas that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. So with that, let's turn to the permanent audit program. So everybody always wants to know when are the audits going to start? Well, according to OCR, as of 2 days ago, they do expect to start the audit program, the permanent audit program, before the year is out. So they wouldn't commit to exactly whether it was going to be October, November, December. But what Zenithia said was that they do expect, now that fiscal year 2016 for them is here, that they do expect to begin the audit program. My guess is we'll see it probably sometime in the November timeframe, because they just let the contracts or signed the contracts at the end of the summer with respect to the folks that are going to be supporting them and conducting the audits themselves. So my guess is that those processes are going to initiate on 1 October, and we probably will see audits begin sometime towards the latter part of the year, maybe possibly in November. The permanent audit program is going to include both desk audits and comprehensive on-site audits, unlike the pilot year. There will be approximately 200 covered entities and business associates selected for desk audits. And when I say "and," what I mean is there are going to be 200 desk audits performed that are going to include both covered entities and business associates. They're going to run a survey program prior to selecting those organizations for those desk audits to identify the covered entities that they're going to create or select from in the pools that they're going to create, as well as the business associates that they're going to select from. But the total number of desk audits that they intend to perform, at least under the contracts that they have let as of today, are 200. There will be estimated 24 on-site comprehensive audits performed after the initial desk audits are performed. So all total, about 224 sites will be audited under the first year of the comprehensive program. The audit protocol has been updated. Zenithia confirmed that they are done with it. They have updated it for all the changes to the rules from the omnibus rule that came out, as well as any other changes that they wanted to make to it. And they will be publishing it shortly. She said that they would be publishing it prior to beginning the actual audits themselves. Earlier, they had said that the audits would be performed by HHS themselves. They've since modified that. They will be performed, or they'll be led by OCR. They will be managed by OCR personnel, but they will be performed by both OCR personnel and with contractor support. So it will probably be an OCR person from whatever region that the facility is located in that's leading the audit process, and one or more or two, however many contractors they have contracted for to support the actual audit process as they perform it. The desk audits, of course, will be done completely remotely, and they are performed by the contractor as well, and then reviewed by OCR. So what does that desk audit process look like? Well, as I said, they're going to start with a pre-audit survey. That pre-audit survey, they estimate, is going to go out to between 800 and 1,200 organizations, covered entities. They are going to use whatever point of contact that they have in the database that they have created, or the databases that they have access to. So that could be the CEO, it could be the compliance officer, it could be the privacy officer, etc. It could be a number of different individuals at that organization, depending on who your organization has identified as your compliance point of contact. If you're not sure who that is, then you just need to make sure that all of the folks that are in those positions are aware of the fact that they could potentially receive this survey. The survey is going to ask you very basic demographic information about your organization so that they can understand what type of organization you are, how large you are, how complex, how many operating locations you have. They're going to ask information about your business associates, which is what they're going to use to generate the business associate targets, if you will. And they're going to use the information that they receive back from the surveyed organizations to then select those 200 entities that they're going to perform the desk audits on. Once they have selected those 200 organizations, they will send a notification. And in that notification, there will be a data request, and there will be a time period associated with that data request. And right now, that time period is supposed to be 10 business days. You will be expected to gather up the information that is requested in that notification and upload it to their portal. Once it's uploaded to the portal, the folks at OCR and the contractor that's supporting them will go in and review that information and put together a draft report of findings from their review. They will then communicate back to the organization that draft report of findings for the organization to provide a management review, meaning response to the things that they have identified in their review. Once they get your responses back, they will then finalize their report, which will be then forwarded to OCR. This is going to be a closed loop process, meaning you're going to receive this notification with instructions on where to upload your data to the portal, and then they are going to review it, and then you are going to respond, and then they are going to finalize their report. And there isn't going to be any communication between the site and the auditors. So there's not going to be an opportunity to ask questions, and there's not going to be an opportunity for them to ask for clarification. So it's going to be really important that whatever information that you submit be as accurate as possible and complete as possible. When you look at the scope for the OCR desk audits, for security, for covered entities, for security, it's going to include the risk analysis and questions around risk management. It's going to include requests for information around breach, both breaches that you've had, the content, the investigations, timeliness of your notifications. And in privacy, there's going to be requests for notice of privacy practice and information around various aspects of access or granting access to information. For business associates, the only difference is that there's not going to be any reference to privacy. And on the breach side, as opposed to looking at the content and timeliness of notifications, they're going to be looking at the breaches that a BA has potentially had and their reporting requirements to the covered entity that they were working for. When the on-site comprehensive audits start, as I said, it'll include both the covered entities and the business associates. So let's look at the comprehensive audit process. This one's a little bit different. There'll be a notice and document request. Again, this will come via registered mail. It'll come to, again, whoever that point of contact is for your organization, who's listed as the primary point of contact for compliance responsibilities. This too will have a time limit associated with it, but the time limit here is a little bit longer. It's estimated to be 15 business days. Once you have submitted your documentation, the auditors will review that documentation, and then they will have a pre-on-site conference with you over the phone where they will introduce the audit team, they will introduce the audit process, they will talk about the timeline and what to expect, and then they will coordinate their on-site activities with you. They will then show up on site, and they plan to be there for a shorter period of time. They hope to be able to complete the majority of the on-site comprehensive audits within a three-day period. And so they will show up on site, and they will conduct their on-site activities and collect further information with respect to your audit. And then they will go away, and they will put together their draft report. Once they've completed putting together their draft report, they will then submit that to you, back to the organization that was audited, and request that you review it and respond to it, just like during the pilot program. So you will have an opportunity to review what they have observed and what they have found, and provide responses to those findings. Once you have responded, and there'll be a time limit associated with that too as well. But once you have responded, they will then put together their final report and submit their final report to HHS. Now, one of the questions I always get asked is there any enforcement associated with these audits? And the answer is no, not directly. But it could lead to an enforcement action. And what I mean by that is this. The purpose of these audits was not for enforcement. So what OCR has done is they have actually put in place, for lack of a better term, a virtual firewall between the OCR audit program and their enforcement activities, meaning the folks that are involved in enforcement do not have direct access to the folks that are involved in the audit program or to the audit results. If an organization goes through either one of the audits or one of the comprehensive audits and performs poorly during that process, meaning fails to respond, fails to cooperate, demonstrates some evidence of neglect or negligence or non-responsiveness to the audit process, what OCR has said is that in those circumstances where there is compelling evidence that there is a compliance problem, issue, that they will then refer that organization to the appropriate field activity to open a compliance review, just like any other complaint or any other investigative process. And it's from that subsequent investigation that field office will conduct that any enforcement action could potentially be taken. So there won't be any enforcement action directly from one of these audits. But if we don't cooperate with these audits or we don't perform well during these audits, depending on the reason for that non-performance or non-cooperation, it could lead to a compliance review, which could then lead to some form of enforcement. For the comprehensive audits, they've also told us what they intend, at least for the moment, for the scope of those audits to be as well. It's going to be a little bit more detailed than the desk audits. From a security perspective, they say they're going to be looking at device and media controls, transmission security, encryption of data at rest, and primarily their focus is going to be around the encryption of data on laptops, mobile devices, phones, media, removable media, but it could also include workstations or servers, etc. And they're going to look at facility access controls. On the privacy side, it's going to be around the administrative and physical safeguards around protected health information, and around workforce training to HIPAA policies and procedures, and primarily to those individuals who are involved in the processes for uses and disclosure and dissemination of patient information. Other areas that they could look at during the comprehensive audits are areas that are identified during, it says here, the 2015 audits, because earlier they had anticipated starting the desk audits prior to October. But it's really what it should say is areas that are identified during the desk audit process. So in other words, if during the desk audits they determine that people are still struggling with the risk assessment requirement, then there could be additional focus put on risk assessment during the comprehensive audit process as well. They will review breach reports as well as consumer complaints for information to focus on during the comprehensive audits as well. So they now have, I think everybody knows that they now have all of the breach reports automated and in databases. They now have the complaint process automated and in databases. And they're actually able to go in and search through their database with respect to just across the board, as well as with respect to a single entity or organization, and identify trends or high-profile areas that perhaps they would want to then identify as an area to look at during the comprehensive audits. And this will be one of the ongoing things that they do through year over year as this program progresses. They'll begin to look at the information that they're gleaning from the audits themselves, the information that they're gleaning from the complaint process, and information that they're gleaning from the breach report process to identify key areas for the audits to address each year. So all of this information slowly but surely is becoming automated and is able to drive the focus for their audits. All right, so now we've talked about where we were, and we've talked about what the permanent program is supposed to look like in terms of the desk audits and the comprehensive audits. So let's talk about the actual audit process itself. So these audits are what we call performance audits. They are conducted in accordance with generally accepted government audit standards. There will be findings and observations developed as a result of these audits. The difference between a finding and an observation: a finding is a clear indicator of non-compliance with a particular requirement. An observation may be an area where there can be improvement, but not necessarily non-compliance. The objective of each one of these is to assess various attributes of your program. How effective is the program, the economy of the program, efficiency, internal controls around the implementation of programs, and just overall compliance. The audit process looks something like this, although it may end up being somewhat collapsed. Their goal during the permanent audit program is to hopefully conduct these audits in a shorter period of time, but they'll still be the same process that we talked about earlier in terms of the notification, the collection of the documentation and the review, the on-site field work, the draft plan, or the draft report, I should say, your opportunity to respond, and then the final report. So if you go into each one of these phases separately, the first phase of it, meaning planning for the audit, they're going to send a notification letter to the covered entity. It's going to be a registered. Whoa, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but your audio is not doing very well at this time. I'm not sure. You're sounding a bit robotic.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead and try again, and let's see how it is.
Okay. Well, you're going to tell me if it sounds better.
Actually, it doesn't. I'm sorry, Mac. Is there another phone you could use possibly, or call into that alternate number?
Let me try calling into the alternate number real quick.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
I apologize for our audio issues. Mac will be back with us here momentarily. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your responses, everyone. Once Matt comes back on, we'll let him continue. Maybe it's just a certain few phones that are having issues. I apologize for the interruption.
Hello?
Hey, Matt, go ahead.
Okay, does it sound better now?
Okay, go right ahead.
Okay, all right. So obviously they're going to be sending this notification via registered mail, so we need to be ready to receive that. There's going to be an information request, as I said, and an entity survey that's going to ask you various information about your covered entity. And then they're going to set up the initial telephone contact with you to do several things, one of which is to make sure that you received this letter and that it got to the right person. One of the things that they found during the pilot program, at least at the beginning of the pilot program, was that a lot of times these letters were not getting to the right people in the organization or to the right person in the organization, and organizations were not ready when the auditors eventually showed up or called to set up their on-site meetings. They'll also be there during that call to respond to questions and concerns. This will be a lot different than the desk audit, where you don't have an opportunity to converse with the auditor. Here you will be able to do that. You'll be able to ask questions and get prepared before they show up. And then they'll confirm all the due dates, not only the due dates for documentation, but also they'll confirm the schedule for the rest of the audit activities. Amanda, is it better now? Okay, I'm assuming it is. So this is just an example of the documentation request. We haven't seen a new documentation request since the pilot program. We assume that the documentation request that they provided then, at least for the comprehensive audits, is not going to change much. For the desk audits, it's going to be much shorter and much more concise to the things that I talked about earlier. So prep work in terms of getting ready. There's going to be a kickoff call to confirm the covered entity and discuss the site visit and logistics that happens after the initial introduction call. They'll perform analysis of documentation provided by the covered entity or the business associate. the documents that have been sent in. They may actually look for missing documents. They'll look for documents that they'll try to identify documents that are not up to date or that are not current, so that when they show up on site, they can ask for more documentation by those things. And they'll identify other documentation requirements that they'll have that they'll ask for when they are with you during the on-site process. And during that on-site process, they're going to start off with an entrance conference. This was something, again, that they learned during the pilot program was very important. They will come on site. The team will initially start with this conference with all of the stakeholders at the organization that's being audited, so that everybody gets introduced on both sides and everybody understands what the process, how the process is going to go down and what to expect. Then they will start to execute their audit practices. They may conduct certain testing. They will interview various folks. They will review further documentation and request other documentation from you with respect to the parts, the things that they're auditing. And they may conduct facility walkthroughs to observe activity in facilities with respect to the things that they're looking at. When they're completed with their data collection, they will conduct an exit conference. During this exit conference, they will not share with the organization all of their findings because they won't have them all ready at that time. But they will generally talk about the things that they observed, the areas that they saw that perhaps were of concern. They will identify any areas where they think they may be requesting further information, and they'll review the rest of the process going forward so the organization knows what to expect after the actual on-site process. Their post-field work is obviously done remotely. This is when the auditors go off-site and begin to analyze the information that they've collected and the information that they've gleaned through their interviews and facility walkthroughs, etc., and they begin to compile their results of the audit. They will finalize the draft of their findings, and they'll issue that draft to the organization that they have audited for that organization to review and respond to. While they're working on their report and conducting their analysis, it is not unexpected that they may reach back to the organization for further information for clarification purposes, or for further information to help them to understand something that maybe they missed as a gap during the audit process itself, or the on-site data collection process itself. So they're not just going to go away and write this report and then submit it back to you. Chances are they're probably going to communicate with you at least once or twice while they're in the process of writing their report. Just a sample audit protocol that you can expect during the comprehensive audit process. From breach notification, they may be looking at things like how you assess breaches, what your process is, how you document those things, how you retain the results of those breach investigations, what the outcomes were, any notifications that you had to make, and what records you kept of notifications that were made, how timely those notifications were, how complete those notifications were, etc. Notifications that you perhaps made to HHS and whether or not those were done on time, and of course notifications that you may have made to the media. On the privacy side, they're going to look at the notice of privacy practice, and this is an area that seems really simple because it's one of those things that you just sort of kind of take for granted that everybody has notice of privacy practice, has them posted, gives them to patients when they show up, and yet almost 80% of organizations during the pilot program at one point or another failed the requirement around notice of privacy practice. So it's something you want to take a look at. They're going to look at requests for restrictions in terms of access to patients' information. just rights of access to patient information in general and how you handle those things, administrative requirements around uses and disclosures and how you disclose information to, for instance, law enforcement, etc., how you handle the process of amending a patient's record or information, and last but not least, how you handle requests for disclosure. On the security side, it's the entire security rule or any aspect of the security rule that they could potentially look at. But the focus right now, for the most part, is around risk assessment and risk management processes, auditing and monitoring, disaster recovery, media destruction and reuse, theft and loss of systems or physical protection of systems, and encryption, primarily because that's where they're seeing the overwhelming number of incidents and breaches that are occurring in healthcare today, and those are the areas that they focus on. So one of those areas that they're going to focus on is that risk assessment. And you can't go to a presentation today by somebody from OCR where they don't start off by reminding everybody once again that you have to perform your risk assessment. It is the first requirement in the rule. It is what they ask for every single time you have a review or an investigation or an audit. They're always going to ask for your most current risk assessment. That risk assessment, from their perspective, needs to be thorough. It needs to be a real risk assessment. It cannot just be an audit. It's not a checklist. It's not a process of just reviewing the HIPAA security rule. This is an honest-to-God risk assessment process that takes into consideration your administrative, physical, and technical controls in your environment, where your PHI lives within your organization and where it traverses your organization, and where there is risk to that information. They expect to see something that identifies those assets. They expect to see something in that risk assessment that identifies what you believe the threat is. They expect to see something in that risk assessment that identifies what you believe your vulnerabilities are, both from an administrative and physical and technical perspective. They expect to see a description of your current controls environment and the maturity of those controls, not just whether or not you have them. And then they expect to see the analytical process in terms of determining identifying those risks, determining the likelihood, determining the impact if one of those scenarios were to occur, and then identifying what you're going to do about it. When you review your risk assessment documentation that you have today, if it does not cover those areas and does not address that process, then that's something you need to look at, because that's what they're going to be looking for when they review it. That's what they're going to be looking for during the desk audits, and that's what they're going to be looking for during the comprehensive audits. And this is what I just talked about. You can break it down. People break it down in different ways. This is just breaking it down into 3 basic elements, but regardless of how you break it down, this is what they're looking for, is actual documentation that demonstrates that the organization has gone through this analytical process for identifying what their vulnerabilities are, their risks are, and what they're going to do about it. So let's talk about how to create an OCR audit toolkit. So you want to prepare a plan to perform periodic mock audits and what I call readiness exercises. And the OCR audit protocol is a perfect tool to help you do that, because you can actually take that tool and break it down into different elements, and you can utilize just parts of it from time to time with your organization to help your workforce become aware of what to expect during one of these audit processes. The current audit protocol is up on the web. That's the one from the pilot program. But as I said, the permanent audit protocol will be coming out shortly. It won't be demonstrably different. It will include the changes from the omnibus rule. but a lot of the elements of it will be very similar to the first protocol. It'll certainly be similar to the first protocol in how it's laid out and how it gets used. And when you're looking at that audit protocol, basically this audit protocol is a very simple process of laying out the procedures or the specifications, if you will, that are in the rule and how to evaluate those. So you have something that establishes a performance criteria, which is a standard. You have various key activities that are identified that are associated with that particular standard. You then have audit procedures and could apply to evaluate how well those key activities are being accomplished. It then relates to the implementation specifications in the rule itself and whether or not those things are required or addressable. And then it identifies who's responsible for providing this information so that you know who the OCR auditors need to talk to when they come on site. If you develop this tool, if you will, or this toolkit, it'll help you actually get your organization ready for these audits, and it'll help the audit process itself go a lot smoother. Let's just look at some examples. So one of the requirements or the procedures that we have in the rule is the opportunity to object. So the performance criteria, it's really simple. Uses and disclosures require an opportunity for an individual to agree or to object. Key activity, the opportunity to object, to use, or to disclose. Do you have a process that covers that? The audit procedure is real simple. They're going to want to interview people who are involved in this process to determine how this process is handled, how you actually do it day to day, what information is generated to document this process and the decisions that are made with respect to the patient's rights or requests, and how you keep record of that. And then who's responsible for doing this? In some organizations it may be the privacy officer, in others it may be the HIM manager, it could be the compliance officer. So who is the person in your organization that's actually required or who has responsibility for this requirement? If you lay this out this way and understand it this way, then it's really easy when the auditors start asking questions who it is we need them to talk to. Let's take another one. Privacy training. Covered entity must train all members of its workforce on the policies and procedures with respect to protected health information as necessary, right? And how to handle that. Again, key activity, training. Do you have a training program? Is your training program documented? How do you manage your training program? How do you reassess individuals that have these responsibilities? They're going to, again, who is it they need to interview to be able to understand how training is provided around privacy requirements? Who is trained? Where are the training records for these people? Can you produce the training records that demonstrate that the people who are involved in these processes have actually been trained? That's part of the evidence that they're going to be looking for during this audit process. Because keep in mind that these audits are very black and white and evidentiary based, meaning they're going to look at a procedure, they're going to look for the policy and the procedures associated with that requirement, and then they're going to look for the evidence that that procedure is being followed and that we're documenting those things. And again, who's responsible for doing this? Who is it I need to talk to? Let's look at security management. Conduct an accurate and thorough assessment of the potential risks and vulnerabilities to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of protected health information. Real simple. Key activity, conduct that risk assessment. Audit procedure, inquire as to how often that risk assessment is performed, how it's performed, who performs it, what practices are followed, what's the process, where's the documentation, can you produce it? It is a requirement. It's a required standard. So from a security perspective, this is one of the things that when they ask for a copy of your risk assessment, they expect that they're going to receive it. And again, who's responsible for it? Same thing with access controls, encryption. I mean, you can just go down through the protocol and you can go through this process of identifying what the performance criteria is, what the key activity is that they're going to be looking for, how they're going to audit for that information, what it relates to, and whether it's addressable or required, and how you're going to respond to it, and who's responsible for it. If you go through this process, you'll be prepared for your audit without a question. So with that, I'm going to stop for a second and just kind of go back over real quickly the audit process, the audit key points. The permanent program is about to kick off. It's going to include both desk audits and comprehensive audits. There'll be about 200 total desk audits covering both covered entities and business associates. There'll be about 24 comprehensive audits covering both covered entities and business associates. There'll be a survey process before the organizations that are going to be audited are selected. So if you receive one of those surveys, you know that you have a better than average chance of being selected for one of these audits. Once you respond to those surveys, they will then select the organizations that are going to be audited, and then they will be notified that they've been selected, and they will go through the processes as I laid them out earlier. And there is no direct correlation between the audit program and their enforcement activities. But if we don't perform well during an audit, meaning we don't comply, we don't cooperate, we don't provide documentation, or we can't, or we fail to produce things that they believe are things that should be able to be produced, then that could result in an organization being referred for a compliance review, which could then lead to an enforcement action. So with that, what I'd like to do now is just kind of talk a little bit about what HITECH, one of the things that HITECH provides, who's our partner in this presentation today, that I think is really helpful to you in your audit processes. And there's actually a couple of solutions that they have that I think fit this bill. One of them is obviously their Security Audit Manager product, and the other one is their Privacy Risk Management product. And because the reason I say that is because both of these help us to collect the information that can help us to answer a lot of the audit questions that we may get asked. It forces us to focus on our policies. It allows us to demonstrate that we have active monitoring going on in our environment, both with what's going on around our PHI with respect to our workforce, as well as what's going on with our vendors, our third-party suppliers. And it demonstrates that we're doing ongoing proactive analysis of our risk in our environment on a regular basis. And last but not least, it provides reporting, actual reporting, that we can produce as part of our evidence that we might need to respond to a question during the audit. Cynergistek, our company focuses in consulting services, and one of the things that we've done working collaboratively with HITECH is developed certain managed services around the SAM product in order to help organizations optimize the benefit that they get from that product, but also be able to have a program that they can absolutely demonstrate to auditors and to investigations when asked that demonstrates that they are actively auditing and monitoring what goes on in their environment. So the first part of this is a privacy optimization program where we work with the organization and with HITECH during the implementation phase of the SAM product or after the SAM product has been implemented to optimize the actual audit plan itself and the audit processes on the back end, so that when the auditors come in and ask the question on what are we doing with respect to auditing and monitoring and security incident response, etc., we can absolutely demonstrate that we have a comprehensive audit plan that addresses all of our PHI and all of our workforce members. Then we have managed services on top of that for certain organizations that elect to have assistance in terms of privacy analysts and privacy folks involved in assisting them in monitoring what goes on with their SAM products, so helping them to not only manage that product and run those reports and create those reports and the alerts, but actually analyze the events and provide that information to the privacy teams at the hospital so they have more actionable intelligence to pursue. All of this contributes to the information that you have and that you would be able to demonstrate or provide during the audit. And like in any other audit, the more information you can provide and the more accurate information you can provide to the auditor's questions, generally the better you're going to perform. So with that, Amanda, let me turn it back over to you to see if we have any questions on the audit process.
Okay, thank you, Mac. We actually do have some questions here. The first one is, will the closed loop process be fully described in the audit notifications?
It should be. They're usually pretty good about putting all of that information in their notification letters. I don't know that for sure, so that's a good question for me to go back to the folks there at OCR and ask, and I will do that and see if we can't post an answer for you.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, the pre-audit survey will be done by mail rather than email, correct?
That is correct. They are looking at, and in fact, we did get the question at HIMA with respect to are they going to eventually move to electronic notifications? And Zenithia said that at least for the time being, it's still going to be a registered mail notification.
Okay, the next question is, have you heard of anything that might indicate when the OCR audit protocol will be updated? It's 2 years after Omnibus and still no updates. Of course, my guess is that the protocol will be updated before the next round, but when is anyone's guess, unless you might have newer information?
So according to Zenithia on Monday, Ms. Clemens, the audit protocol is complete in terms of its update. They have incorporated all of the Omnibus changes and changes that they wanted to make from lessons learned from the protocol, or excuse me, from the pilot program, and they just haven't published it yet. But the protocol is updated already.
Okay. Our next question is, do you know the number of pre-audit surveys that will be sent to determine the percentage likelihood of an audit?
So the number that they have thrown out, or the range that they have thrown out, is between 800 and 1,200. My guess is they'll send out 800 initially and see what the response is and decide whether they need the additional 400 since they're only going to run 200 audits.
Okay. The next question is it safe to assume that every facility is at least going to get the pre-audit survey?
No, it's not safe to assume that at all. There are about 3.5 million covered entities in this country. There is, by any estimate, the number of business associates is 10 times that number. So all you have to do is do the math, and you'll see that not very many folks are going to receive this notice. So if you don't get the survey, then you're not going to be audited in the first year. So that's your first indication that you probably have not been selected.
Okay. I just want to let everybody know it is the top of the hour, but we have just a couple of questions left in the queue, so we'll go ahead and go over these. If any others come in after that, we will respond to you via email. The next question is, for reviews of breach notification rule, what reporting time frame will they use? Previous year, past 2 years, past 6 years?
They haven't said exactly what they're going to use. What they have said is that they could go as far back as every year that the rule has been in force. or back 6 years in terms of what the total number of years is for retention. But my guess is they're probably going to start with something that's more reasonable, like the current year or the last 2 years, and depending on what they see, in other words, if everything looks good, up to date, accurate, complete, chances are that that's as far as they go. It's like any other audit, right? If they request information and it's not very well organized or not complete or not accurate or not doesn't appear to be up to date or what have you, then they may ask for more.
Okay, the next question is there any way to find out who the contact person is for our organization so we can notify them to be aware of the letter?
That's a good question too, and I can ask that question as well. I know that they what Zenithia and Linda and a few other folks there have told me is that they use multiple databases to identify who the right individual is. So I don't know that they have a master list that they've created, but they may have a way to look up exactly who that person would be for your organization. If somebody said, I'm XYZ hospital, who do you have for me? They could probably look that up. So let me ask that question and see if there's a process that they would like you to follow to get that information, and we'll follow up with an answer.
Okay. All right. We have had just a couple come in. We can respond to those via email, or Mac, if you want to go ahead and respond to those now.
I can respond to them now if folks want to,
Okay.
Might as well. We're here.
Okay. So to be sure, how many possible CEs will be audited? What's the range?
Well, my guess is there's going to be 224 audits performed. At least that's what the contract calls for, and that's what Zenithia confirmed. 200 of those are desk, 24 of those are comprehensive. My guess is that probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 2/3 of those, probably is a good estimate, are going to be covered entities in the desk audit, and maybe a quarter of them or a third of them be business associates. The reason I say that is because there are so many different categories of covered entity that they're going to be addressing. I don't believe they have business associates broken down in that same fashion. So my guess is there's going that, and again, this is all speculation because they have not said how it's going to break down. But my guess is the majority are going to be covered entities, and some percentage will be business associates. Of the comprehensive audits, I really don't know how to break that down. I mean, there's only going to be 24 of those performed. So there'll be some of those that are business associates, some of those that are covered entities. I think it's too hard to tell now in terms of what those numbers are, because they have not said one way or the other.
Okay. The next question is, I work for a covered entity that falls under a corporation composed of a not-for-profit hospital and for-profit provider clinics. Would we be completing the survey questionnaire for the corporation, both entities, or as separate entities? And there's the second part. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. That's fine.
The second part is, if a CE is also a BA for another entity, would we complete the survey stating we are a CE and BA?
So you would not be completing the survey saying that you were a BA for another entity. You would be completing the survey saying that you are as a covered entity. And if there are multiple parts to your covered entity, it comes down to if you're both identified as, if your organization is identified as one covered entity or as multiple covered entities. They will, So in other words, if it's the holding company and then they have the clinic, and the clinic is part of the holding company as one single covered entity, then it's the holding company that would fill out the survey. And of course, filling out the survey, it'll ask you questions about your organization. So it'll ask you numbers of facilities you have, geographic locations, etc. So you will identify in there as a single covered entity that you have multiple operating locations and what they are. Then, when they actually select organizations for audit, for those organizations that have multiple entities that they own or manage, like say an IDN or a large health system that has multiple hospitals or multiple clinics, etc., or a health plan, if you will, they may only select the health plan, or they may only select a clinic, or they may only select one of the hospitals to actually conduct the audit. But they'll send the notification initially to whoever the compliance contact is for that particular entity. But the surveys, I believe, will go to any of the identified covered entities, any organization that's identified as a covered entity. With respect to what was the second part of that question?
Okay, it says if a CE is also a BA for another entity, would we complete the survey stating we are both?
I don't recall, but I can find that quick. I don't recall the survey asking if you are a BA for another covered entity. Obviously, if it does, you would have to respond to that. I believe that what it does now, it treats the survey, the person completing the survey, as a covered entity. And then it asks questions about your business associates, not you as a business associate. So I believe that's the way it's constructed today. That survey, by the way, is available out there on the OCR website, and I believe it's also available on the OPM website because they completed that back during the summer. And you can actually pull down the survey and look at it now.
Okay, the next question is, when will you know the survey time is over? So if you didn't get one, you wouldn't.
Zenithia didn't say exactly how long they intended to do this, but my guess is that if they are expecting to begin these audits before the end of the year, that I would suspect that those surveys are probably going to go out sometime in October at the latest. And I would expect that if you haven't seen a survey by the end of the year, you're not going to see one. But I don't. But again, I can ask that question as well and see if we get a different answer. But that would be my guess, just based on her timing in terms of when she believes the audits are going to begin. They have to do the survey first, so they're going to have to get those surveys out of the way if they're going to start auditing.
Okay, the next is pretty much a comment. It says, with respect to the list, it would be good if OCR could post the contact list for confirmation, or if they could say they sent to us a specific role at an organization rather than a person, it would be less likely to be lost.
That's a great recommendation, and I think that, and I don't want to speak for the OCR folks, but I know that this whole process of identifying who to contact and points of contact, etc., has not been an easy chore for them, to put it mildly. I think if there was an easy way for them to do that and to do what this person is suggesting, I think that they would jump at that. And I think that's been part of their struggle, has been just identifying and keeping up with all of the covered entities, because as I think everybody on this call knows, that we have new covered entities being created. We have covered entities that are disappearing because they're being acquired by somebody. We have all kinds of things happening dynamically in the industry with respect to who all the covered entities are. And there isn't some master database somewhere that everybody registers with. So it's not been very simple or easy for them to come up with the points of contact. And so that's one reason why they actually went to the process of sending it via registered mail, because when they send that registered letter and it doesn't get answered, or it gets opened, and then they contact the person who opened it within a day or two after they've sent it, which is one of their other steps that they go through, they're able to figure out very quickly whether or not the letter went to the right person or not. So they recognize that their database may not be as up to date as they'd like it to be, primarily because there's no, like I said, master index sitting out there for them to pull from. But that's one reason why they went to the registered mail, and that's one reason why they follow that registered mail up within a day or two with a phone call to make sure that the entity that they think they sent it to is the entity that received it, and that it got to the right person.
Okay, thank you, Mac. That's all the questions we have.
Okay, well, good luck, everyone. And like I said, hopefully what we've heard today and what we heard yesterday and the day before from the folks at OCR is accurate, and we are going to see them begin to roll out the permanent program.